He opened his eyes to red dust again. The same sound, the same hiss of his suit's oxygen regulator, the faint metallic echo of wind scraping across the outer hull of Ares Station, and that strange pulse in his helmet speaker, like a heartbeat that wasn't his. Captain Elias Wren was alone on Mars. At least, that's what the logs said. But the part that disturbed him more than the isolation was the fact that he remembered dying. And yet here he was, awake again, at the start of Sol 173. He knew the routine by heart now. Step outside. Check the solar panels. Recalibrate the long-range comm array. Then log the error code in the diagnostics module. It would end, as always, with static. The Earth signal never came through. Not anymore. Elias had relived this day 19 times. At first, he thought it was shock. That maybe his crash landing weeks earlier had scrambled his mind. The rescue shuttle from orbit had been compromised, thrown off trajectory by a dust storm. He survived the impact. Barely. But the rest of the crew, gone. No voices. No movement. Just the slow creeping silence of Mars tightening around him like a noose. He buried their remains in the regolith near the rover. Marked the graves with hollowed-out battery cores. Tried not to look at them each time he passed. But the loop didn't begin after the crash. It started when he found the door. It was half buried in Martian soil, 50 meters east of the station, behind a cluster of jagged basalt outcroppings. Not part of their mission. Not something anyone had ever logged. A metallic hatch, rusted around the edges, marked with a NASA emblem no current mission used, one that hadn't existed since 2037. And the worst part? His own name was printed on the side. Captain Elias Wren, Atmospheric Specialist. He'd stared at it for hours, helmet fogging, hands trembling inside the suit gloves. He'd radioed Houston. No answer. He'd tried to open it. The keypad pulsed faint red. Locked. That night, the loop began. He died in his sleep. Heart failure, maybe. No warning. Just a crushing, dreamless void, then waking up again, to red dust, the hiss of oxygen, and the gentle thrum in his helmet speaker. Every morning since, the world reset. The same sunrise. The same storm warnings. The same flicker of power loss at 12:47 p.m. Like a script he'd been forced to memorize. But each cycle, he remembered more. On the third loop, he found a message scrawled into the wall of the hydroponics dome in dried condensation. Stop opening the door. He hadn't written it. On the seventh, the door was already open. Inside was darkness. Steps descending into Martian stone. No oxygen. No lights. Just the faint, rhythmic clicking of something deep below, like a relay trying to restart. He entered. He doesn't remember what he saw. Only that he screamed, a hoarse, guttural sound recorded on his helmet feed that played back garbled and warped, like it had passed through time itself. Then, death again. Back to the start. Sol 173. Red dust. The station. The hiss of his breath. Elias stopped trying to understand it. His logs were corrupted. Earth was silent. Even the onboard AI, Halia, seemed off, repeating system checks and giving timestamps that didn't align with reality. Each time he tried to stay inside the station, something broke. First, the power grid. Then the oxygen line. Then a hull breach that shouldn't have been possible, right through titanium. The loop wouldn't let him avoid it. The door. By loop 15, he began leaving himself messages. Notes scratched onto polyglass. Voice memos hidden in the rover's logs. But the loop reset everything except his memories. Not a single message carried forward. Except the first one. The one he didn't write. That one remained. Stop opening the door. He tried ignoring it. Once. Just once. In loop 16, he stayed in bed, wrapped in thermal blankets, refusing to move. For 10 hours, nothing happened. No error codes. No oxygen failure. No seismic tremors. Then, at exactly 1831, a figure appeared outside the station. Not on any camera feed. Just there. In the dust. Watching. Its suit was like his. The same make. The same NASA markings. But its visor was cracked, and behind it there was no face. Just darkness. Elias blacked out. No heart attack. No environmental breach. Just a seizure. A collapse. When he woke up, red dust. Soul 173. Start again. He stopped pretending he could escape. Instead, he began exploring deeper. Each loop, he went further into the underground structure beneath the door. The staircase stretched longer than possible, carved into stone in impossible angles. Geometric designs lining the walls, spirals, glyphs, some that pulsed faintly when he passed. And every time, he died just before reaching the final chamber. Sometimes he burned. Sometimes he suffocated. Once he simply froze. In place. Muscles locked. Mind intact. Time stopped. Now, in the 19th loop, he understood. He wasn't just in a loop. He was in a test. The structure wasn't natural. Nor was it alien. It was a kind of observatory. A pocket of reality anchored outside the regular flow of time. He'd read about the theoretical physics in training. Closed time-like curves, temporal compression, causal reversal. But no one ever expected it to exist on Mars. Yet here it was. And somehow, it had targeted him. Why? Why him? Why now? Each time he died, something whispered in the static, garbled, half-formed, like a voice from a different universe bleeding through. Elias, stop this. And on the last loop, just before he passed out at the threshold of the chamber, he saw something carved into the floor in jagged Martian rock. Only one version of you leaves this planet alive. Now he stood outside the door again, staring at the keypad glowing red. His hands didn't tremble anymore. He'd stopped being afraid. He pressed his fingers to the rusted frame, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Show me how I die." The hatch clicked open, and he descended into the loop again. The staircase felt longer now. Each step echoed like it belonged in a cathedral, not a tunnel carved beneath the Martian crust. The deeper Elias went, the more the silence began to feel deliberate, as if the stone itself were listening. His helmet light flickered against the walls, catching glimpses of symbols he didn't recognize. Not alien hieroglyphs, but mathematical expressions, scratched into the surface like scars. Some pulsed faintly with a bioluminescent glow. Others faded when he looked at them directly, only to return when he turned away. The glyphs weren't written on the walls. They were written in time. He descended until his oxygen levels dipped into the red. But that didn't matter anymore. He already knew this body wouldn't last. The loop would take him, just as it always did. But before it did, he needed to reach the chamber. It waited at the bottom of a spiral corridor that seemed to fold in on itself. Geometry lost meaning here. Walls curved and reversed, shadows fell in the wrong direction. His HUD was useless. Distance stopped working. His sense of time thinned, stretched. Minutes felt like hours. Or seconds. Or both. And then, he reached it. A circular room. 40 meters wide. Smooth walls like obsidian, carved into segments, each glowing with faint red pulses, like a heartbeat. In the center stood a pedestal. He'd seen it before. Or maybe it had shown itself to him. On Loop 11, he'd barely made it through the door before passing out. But he'd remembered a glimpse, a glass-like dome at the room's center, within it, a body. Now, he stood before it again. It was him. Or something that had once been him. The figure floated inside the containment dome, arms folded across the chest, suit torn and stained with black soot. The face was visible through the cracked visor, cold, desaturated, eyes open. Elias stared at his own corpse. Not the one he remembered. Another version of him. A timeline that had played out to the end. And failed. He reached toward the glass, but as his glove touched it, a spark erupted beneath his fingers. Images flashed across his vision, blinding, fast, like a corrupted reel of film jammed into his skull. He saw himself in the station, screaming into the comms, begging Earth to respond. Himself in the rover, driving into a dust storm with something chasing behind the wind. Himself buried up to the neck in red sand, sunlight dimming. Himself standing over a second body. Another him. Another version. Then the voice returned, clearer now. Closer. He made it further than you did. Elias spun around. Nothing. The room was still. The dome sealed. The shadows unmoving. But the voice had vibrated through the floor, not the air. Through his bones, not his ears. You're just one of many. One echo in the corridor. He gritted his teeth. Who are you? He demanded. No reply. But the pedestal lit up. Lines of red laser etched through the floor, forming a circular interface with no controls. Just a pulsating center. A heartbeat. Elias reached down, no hesitation anymore. He placed his hand on the pulse. And suddenly, he wasn't in the chamber anymore. He stood in the station. Not the broken one he knew, but pristine, fully powered. Lights humming, plants thriving in hydroponics. A full crew laughing somewhere beyond the walls. He stumbled forward, disoriented, then stopped. There, at the end of the corridor, he saw himself. A version of Elias, alive, clean, unbroken, reviewing data logs, whispering into a comms mic. Sol 173. Finding anomaly east of station. Door structure. No entry protocol. Requesting analysis. Elias watched, stunned. This was before the loop. Before the crash. This was the timeline that worked, before something diverged. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. Red emergency warnings flared. Elias turned, but the station dissolved into ash. Wind howled. Dust clawed across his visor. And he was back in the chamber, hand still pressed against the pulse. The dome was gone. So was the body. The entire room was different now. The walls were covered in hundreds, thousands, of visors. Each cracked. Each with his face behind it. They were stacked like skulls in a tomb, lining the walls of the room, surrounding him like ghosts. And above them all, carved into the ceiling in letters 30 feet wide, were the words, "Not every version gets out." He staggered back, breath heaving, not from fear, but from clarity. This wasn't a loop caused by a machine, or an accident, or quantum fluctuation. It was a selection process, and he was the latest candidate. That's why the door called to him, why the messages persisted, why some versions of him had written warnings, while others had gone deeper, trying to break the cycle. Some gave in, some never made it this far. But all of them had seen the same truth. There was something buried beneath Mars, something older than any mission, any nation, any memory. Something that fed on possibilities. Timelines. Versions. A god, maybe. Or a filter. One that judged which copies of Elias were worthy of escape, and which ones deserved to rot. His oxygen levels dropped to 2%. Vision blurred. The room pulsed again, bright red this time. The pedestal glowed once more, not with light, but with a symbol. A spiral, twisting endlessly. The last thing Elias saw before collapsing was his own reflection, hundreds of them, layered into infinity. Each one watching, each one waiting for their turn. He woke up gasping, but something was wrong. The air in his lungs felt stale, processed, old. Not the filtered, precise oxygen blend of Ares Station's life support. This was recycled, and not by machine. He opened his eyes. The red dust was gone. Elias sat upright, blinking hard, surrounded by low metallic walls bathed in faint blue light. The architecture was impossible. Martian rock woven with circuitry. Veins of glowing crystal ran through the ceiling like neural paths. Above him, the symbol burned into the metal, a spiral, curling inward without end. He was no longer on the surface, no longer on his Mars. A new voice echoed, soft and synthetic. Candidate number 1197 has returned. He turned. There was no speaker, no console. The voice came from everywhere, from the walls, from the light, from inside his thoughts. Your prior termination resulted from threshold collapse. Fatal cerebral overload. Body disposal completed. Data retained. Memories recompiled. Welcome back, Elias. This was no hallucination, no dream. It was an observation chamber, one not built by humans. And yet, Parts of it felt human. The air pressure, the gravity calibration, the faint smell of scorched electronics. It was mimicking Earth. Elias staggered to his feet. Where am I? Silence. Then the spiral on the wall blinked. Closer. He stepped forward. The spiral pulsed. A platform rose from the floor, displaying a cracked helmet, his helmet, with blood dried into its neck joint. Another failed version. He picked it up. Inside, a piece of cloth had been stuffed between the padding. He unfolded it, hands shaking. Scrawled in pen ink were the words, "You made it farther than me. It watches through our eyes. Find the fracture. Exit through memory." Beneath that, a symbol. A triangle with a single vertical slash. He'd seen it before, carved onto the ceiling in the subterranean chamber from the last loop. It wasn't just decoration. It was a map. He turned, and behind him, the walls shifted. A new corridor unfolded from the metal like it was growing. Lights blinked in a slow rhythm, beckoning, as if this version of Mars had been waiting for him to remember. He followed. Each step brought flashes, half memories, half lives. He saw himself climbing a communication tower during Sol 89, screaming into a storm. He saw himself hugging a woman on Earth, his sister, a lover. The memory dissolved too fast. He saw himself die over and over again from 1,000 impossible causes: pressure breaches, time collapse, brain hemorrhage, suicide. Every version remembered a little more, and every version left something behind. The corridor led to a chamber shaped like a sphere, holographic threads twisting around its walls. The triangle slash symbol glowed at the center, embedded in a control console unlike any interface he'd seen before. The moment his fingers touched it, the room exploded with vision. He saw all of them. Thousands of Elias Wrens, dying, screaming, collapsing, begging, breaking. One version made it to orbit and was shut down by a black satellite that shouldn't exist. Another entered the spiral chamber, looked directly into the light, and never moved again. One lasted long enough to record a message. "I'm sorry, Earth. We were never meant to leave." And at the heart of it all, something watched. It wasn't a being, not in the way humans define it. It was a presence, coiled around the corridors of time like a snake inside a circuit. It called itself the Curator. It spoke not in words, but in pulses of emotion, fragments of memory, physics wrapped in thought. It didn't threaten. It didn't judge. It simply catalogued every timeline, every failure, every decision Elias had made on Mars, across every loop and dimension. It had recorded them, as if his life were a pattern, playing out across a cosmic lattice of probability. And now, it was looking for the right version to release. Why? Because Mars wasn't just a planet. It was a filter, a machine buried in time, one that ran simulations not of data, but of souls, projections of identity, choices, morality, endurance. It tested explorers like Elias to see which version of a man could survive the truth. Not escape it, survive it. Elias staggered back from the console. What happens when I do? The chamber darkened. The spiral flickered. You return. To Earth. To consequence. A scream echoed through the room. He turned, and one of his past selves stumbled into the chamber, bleeding from the mouth, eyes hollow, body twitching like a puppet. It wasn't alive. It was a warning. A memory the Curator kept on loop. This version had tried to escape too early. Elias raised his hands. No, not me. I'll finish it. He turned back to the console. In its surface, a pulse awaited, a final imprint. He placed his palm on it. Everything turned white. Then, black. Then, a memory. His real memory. Earth. Clouds. A shoreline. A woman's voice calling his name. Not in warning. Not in fear. In love. It wasn't just a test of survival. It was a test of remembrance. The Curator didn't want a soldier. It wanted a man who remembered who he was. Who he loved. Why he went to Mars in the first place. As light returned, Elias stood in the central chamber again, alone. The spiral gone. The dome open. No more visors. No more corpses. Just him. And one path forward, leading to the surface. The hatch opened. Not with a hiss, not with hydraulics, but like a breath exhaled from the planet itself. Elias stepped through, expecting the familiar sting of Martian dust, the crunch of red soil beneath his boots. Instead, what met him was light. White. Diffused. Weightless. He blinked. The surface was gone. So was Ares Station. The rover. The antenna tower. The graves. All of it gone. In its place, an endless plain of smooth obsidian stone stretched beneath a sky that shimmered like oil. Not black. Not red. But every color at once, swirling, bending. Above him, Mars' 2 moons hung frozen mid-orbit. Phobos cracked open, as if something inside had stirred. Time was broken here. Or maybe, this was what time looked like when it no longer had direction. He walked. No map. No guidance. But the ground led him as if by memory, toward a distant monolith standing alone in the desert. Tall. Black. Featureless, except for a single glowing emblem etched on its face. The spiral. It was calling him, not with sound, but with recognition. He reached it, touched it, and the world collapsed inward. Everything blinked. And suddenly, he was back on Earth. But not Earth as he remembered it. He stood at the edge of an ocean, waves crashing quietly, salt thick in the air. The wind was warm. He could hear birds. Somewhere nearby, children were laughing. It was beautiful, but wrong. No satellites. No air traffic. No comm signals. His suit's onboard systems, offline. As if this version of Earth had never advanced past the moment humanity chose not to leave. And in the distance, walking across the sand, came a figure. Elias stepped forward. It was himself. Older. Weathered. Eyes calm. No suit. No fear. This version of him had made it back. Not just physically, but whole. No trauma. No loops. He wore the scars of time, not battle. Elias froze. How? The older Elias smiled. One of us always escapes. The rest are archived. He gestured to the sea. This world is one of the exit nodes. Not Earth, but something close. A memory Earth. A chance to choose. To choose what? What to forget? Behind them, the monolith shimmered. The curator is done with you. It found what it needed. One version who remembered not just the data, but the emotion, the grief, the purpose. Elias shook. Was that the test? No. That was the lock. Emotion opens it. Memory sustains it. The moment you loved again, you collapsed the loop. But this isn't real. It doesn't have to be. It's enough. The wind stopped. The sea froze. And in that moment, the truth poured in. Elias saw every version of himself that had ever looped, died, failed, tried. He saw their final moments, their notes, their screams. He felt their pain, their exhaustion, their final thoughts. He carried all of them now. A final voice spoke, not the older Elias, not the curator. His own voice. Only one version leaves. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was back in the dome, in Ares Station. The power flickered. The Martian wind howled. But this time, he remembered everything. And the loop did not restart. No error code appeared. No pulse in his helmet. No door in the dust. He stumbled outside. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the regolith. The graves were still there. The wreckage still smoldered. But overhead, Earth was visible. Bright. Blue. Whole. A flicker in the clouds. Then, a transmission tone. The comm tower lit green. A voice came through. Ares Station, this is Houston. We've re-established link. Captain Wren, do you copy? He fell to his knees. Tears soaked the inside of his helmet. Houston, he whispered. I remember. Silence. Then, Captain, what do you remember? He looked at the dust, at the horizon, at the strange light in the sky no one else would ever see. All of it. And in that moment, Elias knew. He was the one who left. Not the strongest, not the smartest, but the one who remembered enough to be forgiven. The curator had released him, but not because he'd beaten the loop, because he'd understood why it existed. To sift through possibility, to measure soul, to find a version of humanity that remembered what truly mattered before it was allowed to go home. And now he was going home, or at least to the version of Earth that would have him.